You stopped trying to explain yourself about 3 years ago. Someone asks why you didn't come to the thing, and you say you were tired. You weren't tired. You were sitting on your couch, fully awake, doing absolutely nothing, and it felt better than pretending to care about their birthday drinks at a bar, where you can't hear anyone anyway. You've got maybe 2 people you actually talk to. Maybe 1, maybe none that would notice if you disappeared for a month, and every self-help article you've ever read has told you, this is the problem. That you're broken. That connection is a human need, and you're failing at being human. They've got words for you. Antisocial, avoidant, commitment phobic, depressed. Even though you're not sad, you're just selective. They watch you turn down invitations, and they think you're scared. They see you leave early, and they think you're rude. They count your contacts, and they think you're lonely. But here's what they don't see. You're not failing at friendship. You're operating on a different frequency. Your nervous system isn't wired for shallow. Your brain doesn't release dopamine when someone you barely know asks how your weekend was. You're not avoiding connection. You're avoiding the exhausting performance that most people mistake for connection. And the trait they've been calling a deficit? It's been protecting something they lost a long time ago. The ability to be alone without needing to be saved from it. The ability to detect false intimacy before you waste 3 years on it. The ability to know the difference between loneliness and solitude. What if I told you that your empty phone and your quiet weekends aren't evidence of failure? They're evidence of a filtering system so precise that most people's brains don't even have the hardware for it. What if the reason you have few or no friends isn't because you're bad at connection, but because you're too good at detecting when connection isn't real? Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you isn't going to make you want more friends. It's going to make you understand why you never needed them in the first place, and why the 5 traits you're about to recognize in yourself aren't symptoms of isolation. They're the architecture of a mind that refuses to settle for less than what connection actually means. Here's what they don't tell you when you're young. The social world has a quota, not a written one, not one anyone will admit to, but it's there. You're supposed to accumulate birthday parties as a kid, friend groups in high school, college roommates who become your people, bridesmaids and groomsmen, a network, a crew, a squad. And if you show up to 30 without that collection, they start diagnosing you. The therapists call it attachment issues. Your family calls it being difficult. Your coworkers call it not being a team player. And every single one of them is measuring you against a system that was built for people whose brains don't process social information the way yours does. Because here's the lie they sold you, that the number of people who show up to your funeral is the measure of a life well lived, that being alone on a Friday night is a failure, that if you don't have a group chat blowing up your phone, you're somehow falling behind at being a person. They made quantity the metric, and then they pathologized everyone who optimized for quality instead. You've been told your whole life that something is wrong with you because you don't want to get drinks with Janet from accounting, because you don't feel recharged after game night, because you'd rather sit in your car for 20 minutes than walk into a party where you'll have to explain yourself to 7 people who don't actually care about the answer. And the worst part? You started believing them. You started thinking that your resistance to shallow connection was a character flaw, that your inability to maintain friendships that feel like work was evidence that you're cold, or damaged, or missing something fundamental. But what if the system is what's broken? What if the culture that demands constant social performance is what's incompatible with how your brain actually works? I'm about to prove to you that what you've been calling a deficit is actually a defense mechanism, and it's been protecting something rare. Your brain is doing something very specific, and it's not a malfunction. Most people's brains operate like a nightclub door policy. Low standards, high volume. As long as you're not actively dangerous, you're in. Their nervous systems are wired to say yes to social connection first, and filter for quality later, if at all. It's why they collect hundreds of contacts, dozens of friends, and still feel lonely in a room full of people. Your brain operates like a museum acquisitions committee. Everything gets screened. Everything gets vetted. And most of it gets rejected because it doesn't meet the standard. Here's the mechanism. There's a region in your prefrontal cortex that's responsible for something called social prediction error. It's constantly running simulations, taking in data about how people behave, comparing it to how they present themselves, and flagging inconsistencies. Most people have this, But in some people, this system is dialed up, way up. Think of it like a radar designed to detect threats, except it's not detecting danger. It's detecting inauthenticity, performative intimacy, people who say we should hang out but never follow through, people who trauma dump on the second conversation and ghost you by the third, people who want your attention but not your actual thoughts. Your brain catches these microsignals that most people's brains just ignore. The slight delay before someone laughs at your joke, the way they check their phone while you're talking but swear they're listening, the fact that they only text you when they need something but the message always starts with, "Hey stranger, miss you." A study out of UCLA found that people with highly active social prediction error systems experience what they called connection fatigue at a much faster rate than the general population. It's not that they tire of people. It's that their brains are working overtime to process the gap between what people say and what people mean. And when that gap is too wide, the brain flags the relationship as high cost, low reward. Most people don't feel this. Their brains are optimized for volume. Yours is optimized for accuracy. Here's the other part: your dopamine system, the reward circuit that makes social interaction feel good. It's got a higher activation threshold. Casual small talk doesn't hit it. Surface-level banter doesn't register. That's why networking events feel like punishment. That's why group chats drain you. Your brain isn't releasing the feel-good chemicals because it doesn't recognize what's happening as actual connection. But when you do connect, when you find someone who speaks your language, who doesn't perform, who can sit in silence without filling it with noise, your brain floods with oxytocin and dopamine in amounts that would make a social butterfly feel like they just fell in love. You're not broken. You're calibrated differently. Most people are built for breadth. You're built for depth. And the world keeps trying to convince you that depth is the problem. Let me tell you about Nikola Tesla. Not the part where he invented alternating current. The part where he died alone in a hotel room with a pigeon. Tesla had no friends, no family he spoke to, no social circle, and every biography written about him treats this like a tragic flaw, like his genius came at the cost of his humanity. But here's what actually happened. Tesla couldn't tolerate small talk. He couldn't tolerate people who spoke without precision. He once ended a friendship with Mark Twain because Twain showed up late repeatedly, and Tesla's nervous system couldn't handle the unpredictability. People thought he was cold, obsessive, impossible to be around. What they didn't see: his brain was running simulations constantly. Every conversation was a data stream. Every social interaction was a pattern matching exercise. And most people didn't pass the filter because they were inconsistent. They said one thing and meant another. They claimed intimacy but delivered performance. Tesla wasn't avoiding connection. He was protecting his mental bandwidth from the noise of false connection. He had one real companion, a pigeon he fed in the park. And people mocked him for it. But that pigeon showed up consistently. Didn't perform. Didn't demand anything. Just existed in his space without pretense. Sound familiar? The way you'd rather be alone than endure one more conversation where someone asks how you are, but doesn't wait for the real answer? Now let me tell you about Emily Dickinson. She wrote 1,800 poems. Most of them were found after she died because she never showed them to anyone. She stayed in her room for the last 20 years of her life. Her friends were pen pals she never met in person. People called her a recluse, a spinster, mentally unwell. But here's the thing. Dickinson didn't withdraw because she hated people. She withdrew because most social interaction felt like a costume party where everyone was pretending to be someone they weren't. Her letters show that she craved connection, deep, real, unflinching connection. But she couldn't find it in the parlor rooms and dinner parties of 1800s Massachusetts. So she built her world small. A few people she wrote to, her sister, her garden, and in that smallness, she created some of the most emotionally precise poetry ever written, because her brain wasn't cluttered with the exhausting work of maintaining relationships that didn't feed her. She wrote, "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door, not because the soul is broken, because the soul knows what it needs. And it's not more people, it's the right people. Or no people, if the right ones don't exist. You do this too, don't you? You've shut the door, not out of fear, out of discernment. You've looked at what the world calls friendship and decided it's not worth the energy cost. And everyone around you thinks you're missing out. But you're not missing out. You're refusing to settle. And that refusal, that ability to sit in an empty room and not feel like you're failing, is the same trait that protected Tesla's genius and Dickinson's art. It's the same filtering system that kept them from wasting their one life on people who wanted them to be smaller, quieter, easier to digest. They weren't lonely. They were selective. And so are you. Let me show you what I mean. Sign 1. You remember why you stopped talking to people, and it's never the reason they think. Someone asks why you don't hang out with so-and-so anymore, and you shrug and say you drifted apart. But that's not what happened. You remember the exact moment. It was the third time they interrupted you mid-sentence to check their phone, or the time they repeated the same story to you twice in 1 week because they weren't actually present the first time they told it, or the time they said, "I'm always here for you," and then disappeared the second you actually needed something. Most people forget these moments. Their brains categorize it as normal social friction. Your brain files it as data. It's not that you're holding grudges. You're not angry at them. You're just done pretending that inconsistency equals friendship. Other people think you're cold. What they don't see is that your brain is running a cost-benefit analysis in real time. And when someone shows you that their words don't match their behavior, your system flags them as high risk. Not because you're unforgiving, because your nervous system is protecting your energy from people who treat connection like a performance they can drop whenever it's inconvenient. This isn't bitterness. It's pattern recognition. Most people need 5 or 6 betrayals before they stop trusting someone. You need one micro-inconsistency, and that's not a bug. That's a feature. It means you don't waste years on people who were never really there in the first place. Sign 2. You've tested people by going quiet, and most of them never noticed. You've done this. You stopped reaching out first. Stopped texting. Stopped making plans. And you told yourself you were just seeing who would put in effort. But really, you already knew. You were just confirming what your gut had been telling you for months, and they didn't notice. Or they noticed and didn't care enough to ask. Or they noticed and felt relieved because now they didn't have to keep up the pretense either. Most people feel devastated when this happens. You felt validated because your brain had already detected that the connection was one-sided, and the silence just proved it. This is what your social prediction error system does. It runs ahead of your conscious awareness, flagging relationships that aren't reciprocal, and then you test it to see if you're right. And you're always right. This is why you have few friends. Not because you're bad at maintaining relationships, because you're too good at detecting when a relationship is being maintained by you alone. Most people keep watering dead plants. You let them die and move on, and the world calls that cold. But it's not cold, it's just honest. Sign 3. You can sit in silence with someone and know within 10 minutes if you'll ever be close. This one makes you seem psychic. But you're not reading their mind, you're reading their nervous system. Most people fill silence with noise because silence makes them uncomfortable. They're not uncomfortable with you, they're uncomfortable with themselves. And their need to fill the gap tells you everything. It tells you they're performing, that they can't exist in a room without a script, that their version of connection requires constant stimulation. You, on the other hand, can sit in silence and feel completely at ease. Not because you're awkward, because you don't need to prove you're interesting. You don't need to audition for someone's approval. And when you meet someone who can sit in that silence with you, someone who doesn't rush to fix it or fill it, you know immediately. That's the person you'll let in. This is tied to your dopamine threshold. Small talk doesn't activate your reward system because your brain knows it's not real connection. Silence, on the other hand, is a test. Can this person exist without performing? Can they be present without needing to be entertained? Most people fail this test. They think silence is a gap that needs to be filled. You know silence is information, and the people who can't handle it aren't compatible with the way your brain works. So you let them drift, and your contact list stays small. And that's not a failure, that's a filter. Sign 4. You've been called intense by people who can't handle that. You actually mean what you say. You don't do small talk. You don't do surface-level banter. And when someone asks you a question, you answer it honestly. Not brutally, not without tact, just truthfully. And it makes people uncomfortable. They ask how you're doing, and you tell them. They ask what you think about something, and you give them the real answer. Not the palatable one,
They ask if you want to hang out, and you say no if you don't, instead of making up an excuse. And they call you intense, or too much, or a lot. What they mean is you're not playing the game. You're not softening your edges to make them comfortable. You're not pretending that every interaction is meaningful when it's not. Here's what's happening in your brain. Your anterior cingulate cortex, the part responsible for error detection and conflict monitoring. It's highly sensitive. It flags incongruence between what you feel and what you're supposed to say. And for most people, that flag gets ignored because social harmony is more important than honesty. But your brain doesn't work that way. The discomfort of lying, even small, polite social lies, costs you more than the discomfort of being honest. So you say what you mean. And people who are used to everyone performing find it jarring. This is why you have few friends. Because most people want you to pretend. They want you to laugh at jokes that aren't funny. They want you to say yes when you mean no. They want the version of you that makes them feel comfortable, not the version of you that's real. And you can't do it, not because you're rude, because your brain is optimized for authenticity, and inauthenticity has a metabolic cost you're not willing to pay, so you stay alone. And you stay honest. And the few people who can handle that become the only people who matter. Sign 5. You've ghosted people not out of malice, but because explaining why you're leaving would require more energy than the relationship ever gave you. This is the one that makes people think you're cruel. You were talking to someone regularly. Maybe for weeks, maybe months, and then one day you just stopped. No fight, no announcement, just silence. And from the outside, it looks cold. But here's what actually happened. You realized the relationship was transactional. They only reached out when they needed something. Or they only engaged with you when it was convenient. Or every conversation felt like you were pulling teeth, asking questions, trying to connect, getting one-word answers and no reciprocity. And you calculated the cost. The cost of continuing to engage with someone who wasn't matching your effort. The cost of having the "we need to talk" conversation, where you explain that you feel undervalued, and they promise to do better, and then nothing changes. The cost of staying in a relationship that drains you, just to avoid being seen as the bad guy. And you decided the cost was too high, so you disappeared. Most people think this is avoidant, but it's not avoidance. It's triage. Your brain has a finite amount of social energy, and when someone is costing you more than they're giving you, your system shuts it down, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. This is the final piece of your filtering system. You don't just screen for quality on the way in. You screen for quality on the way out, and when someone stops meeting the standard, or when you realize they never met it in the first place, you let them go, quietly, completely, without fanfare. And people think you're cold, but you're not cold. You're just unwilling to martyr yourself for a connection that was never real. And that refusal to settle, that ability to walk away without guilt, it's the reason your life is quieter than most, but it's also the reason you're not slowly dying in a group chat full of people you don't even like. Think of it like this. Most people are building bridges. Wide, accessible, easy to cross. And they're proud of how many bridges they've built. They'll tell you about their network, their people, their community, and they'll measure their worth by how many travelers cross their bridges every day. You're not building bridges, you're building a fortress. High walls, single gate. And the gate doesn't open just because someone knocks. It opens when someone proves they're worth the vulnerability of letting them in, and most people never make it past the wall because they don't want to do the work. They want access without effort. They want intimacy without consistency. And the world will tell you that fortresses are prisons, that you're locking yourself away, that you're missing out on the richness of human connection. But here's the truth they won't say out loud. Bridges collapse. They get worn down by traffic. They get built in places they shouldn't be. And the people who build too many bridges spend their whole lives maintaining structures that don't actually take them anywhere meaningful. Your fortress doesn't need to be maintained, just needs to be protected. And the few people who make it inside, they're not there because you were desperate for company. They're there because they earned it. And that changes everything. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about understanding that you were never broken. You're just incompatible with a culture that confused accumulation with connection. And the emptiness in your phone isn't a void that needs to be filled. It's space you're protecting for something real. So don't change.
Don't force yourself to be more social. Don't guilt yourself into maintaining friendships that feel like work. Don't let anyone convince you that your small circle, or your no circle, is evidence of failure. You're not failing. You're filtering. And the fact that most people don't pass is not your problem. It's information. If you recognize yourself in this, if you felt that sharp sting of being seen somewhere in the last few minutes, drop a Gelantier in the comments. Not for me. For you. So you can scroll through later and see how many of you there are. Quiet. Selective. Refusing to settle. The loneliest people aren't the ones with empty contact lists. They're the ones surrounded by people who don't actually know them. You chose the other kind of alone, the kind that's honest. And that's not something you need to fix. That's something you need to protect.